POG is to explain why the continuation of this Funan Canal will be a very economically as well as a politically unstrategic move for Cambodia. We think there are a few claims to be proven here. We will first prove that the economic benefit as a result of the success of the building of the canal is going to be one that's particularly speculative and going to be one that's particularly risky as well. Given that this canal is built between connecting Cambodia as well as Thailand, this means that in regards to the context of the current active border skirmishes that's happening between Cambodia and Thailand, we will say that this particular claim means that you are quite susceptible of this canal to be quite risky to a lot of disruption that may happen in the future, which does not justify you paying 1 point something billion into this canal for you to build it. Second claim we'll prove as well is that even if you're able to succeed, we think that the process of you building this project and canal still ones that put at a huge economic strain on the Cambodia, which still does not justify you paying 1.5 billion one shot in order for you to have this project. The first thing I want to prove is why is it that this economic benefit is quite speculative, even though let's say we assume that this canal project is likely to succeed. First, we are still unclear what is going to be the increased scale of trade that's going to exist just because you're able to build a more faster or more direct form of canal trade route towards Thailand in itself. Note that because in status quo, we still continue to use Vietnam ports, right? And the reason why we still continue to Vietnam ports is because, number one, we've already established proper trade deals as well as proper trade routes with Vietnam in itself, meaning these are trade routes and trade deals that we are familiar with because we've already established a pre-existing relationship with them, meaning it's likely we have more logistically efficient as well as cheaper costs when it comes to going to somewhere that's far more familiar as opposed to having to have conceding a time lag that's going to exist, meaning that it's quite unfamiliar and speculative as to what is the economic benefits going to accrue if you were to go through this canal. Second is on the idea of we are unlikely to also see a lot of high ROI that's going to exist. So we are unclear as to why is it that the faster and direct kind of trade route is just going to increase the net utility or the scale of trade that's going to exist at the end of the day, right? Insofar that I think that's the burden that opposition have to prove at the end of the day. But I think secondly, it's about the context of the uncertainty of the conflict that exists. So let's say if the canal builds successfully, the problem here is that right now, because in the future, you have built a canal and you spent like $1 billion on it, meaning it is likely for you to now shift away your reliance from Vietnam ports towards this canal in itself because you want to justify the investment that you put into. This means you take away your established trade routes that you already have in Vietnam. You disperse a lot of your trade relations with Vietnam in itself to justify continuing the usage of this 1.5 billion. Problem here is that this 1.5 billion is very susceptible given the conflict that exists, meaning you're actually not diversifying your trade routes. More likely than not, you're actually hedging your bets on something that is far more riskier and far more disruptive than compared to status quo. Bottom line here is that we've proven to you that it's quite economically speculative and quite unfeasible for you to pour in 1.5 billion in this particular canal in itself. Why is this so? Let's say the canal succeeds, right? But the process here is still puts a lot of economic strain, which does not justify the kind of speculative economic benefit that you're going to get at the end of the day. Why is this very important? First is that even if it is mostly funded by Chinese companies, you see that almost half of the kind of budget of this kind of canal is still one that's ought to be subsumed by taxpayers of Cambodia. This is particularly bad because if you look at the context of Cambodia, it is still suffering from a lot of poverty. It is still one of the lowest GDP among Southeast Asia. It's still breed with a lot of levels of corruption, meaning if you argue that it is good to take away taxpayers' money because it's about justifying the welfare of these individuals in the future, it is still unclear as to why is it that this is going to be done in the most effective way possible. We think more than likely or not that the time frame of this project for you to take is going to take years. Years means that within these years in itself, you're putting Cambodian people into immense suffering. You're taking away the taxpayers' money that ought to be put to increase their welfare, to give them welfare provisions, to give them subsidies, to build kind of basic infrastructures for them, things that can directly increase their quality of life much more faster and much more direct. These kinds of timeline are things that you're trading away from if you were to pour into the canal as opposed to pouring it to the canal. Before that, sure, I'll take one.
You say that Cambodia currently is in poverty. The question is, how will Cambodia alleviate their economy and get out of this poverty without this incentive?
So I don't think either of the houses are able to prove an immediate alleviation of poverty. So I think that's quite a high burden to impose on the Gulf. All we have to do is to explain why is it that continuation of these kinds of canal is just going to put Cambodia in far more economic strains. So even if you argue that Cambodia is still going to be equally poor, at least you don't put them in far more disastrous situations. Also, another claim we want to make is that it is very important for you to discontinue it now as opposed to only discontinue it after the excavation has been started. The reasons for here is that first is that excavation means you are physically going there, already hiring individuals to go there and relocate and start the excavation process. This is a process that is often irreversible, right? So if in the future you feel as though that a lot of the money that you put in is one that is like not worth it anymore, you want to now discontinue it, it is often times that you cannot do it anymore because you can't justify the sunk cost that you already put into it. So it's just far more cheaper and far more easier for you to just stop it now as opposed to do it in the long run where it just become far more expensive and far more difficult to do so. But the third claim here is that if you fail and if you choose to discontinue in the future, it becomes very politically unpopular for you to do so. Internationally, it makes you look like a really weak actor who is unable to sustain and go through a really huge economic canal here. Because the problem here is that number one, you lower a lot of trust within your foreign investors, right? Because in the beginning, it's about Chinese investors wanting to fund you because they believe that you have the success to do so. But in the event that you fail because of your capacity of your country that is unable to allow the success of this canal, it means that Chinese investors are likely to now immediately pull out of these kinds of things because they are unable to now to see the return of investment that's going to accrue. Secondarily, this leaves you in a very far more disastrous situation than you were in the beginning because now not only you have to subsume 100% of the funding or the kind of cost and liability of the canal because 49% of the Chinese investors have already been pulled out. Also thirdly, it also sends a signaling effect around the region of Southeast Asia, also other countries as to why is it that you should not continue to invest within Cambodia because they've already filled this kind of huge chunk of projects and it becomes a signaling effect as to why is it that continuing to invest within Cambodia is often a signaling of a failure as opposed to a success. Meaning, bottom line here, we've already proven to you, number one, why is it that it is just the comparative of you continuing to just rely on Vietnam is just not that bad of an option, right? Because number one, we've already explained that the relationship with you in Vietnam is just relatively lesser tensions or even no tensions compared to you and Cambodia in itself. Meaning, by just continually amending and improving our relationship with Vietnam, within this puts Cambodia in a far more strategic situation.
Okay, thanks, PM. Let's go, Alo.
One big problem from the opening government side is they automatically have a bad faith of this Cambodia and also Vietnam as a country. We think that they don't assess the status quo. We think that Vietnam is one of the largest economical power inside of Southeast Asia right now. With the increase of industry in textile, manufacturing, semiconductors, all of this are basically part of vertical integration, also supply chain that's demanded by the Western country and also like China and also Korea. They are very, very dependent towards Vietnam and also Cambodia. So this basically outframes all of their argument in regards towards they are really bad partners, right? We really want to push to you that there are economical benefits that makes this project happen at the very first place. It's not like whether we want to make or not this project, it's we want to discontinue or continue this project. They don't assess why this happened at the very first place. Their case is out of this debate. But second of all, I also want to point out that signaling effect is worse in their side of the house because China has already invested. The moment that they retract is the moment that Western actually question, hey, they don't actually have faith towards their own investment. Exactly the kind of signaling effect is flipped in their side of the house. How does opening opposition comes into the debate? We think that we are going to be clarifying a lot of things that is missing in opening government. First, I'm going to tell you why China is a good partner. This is establishing, the kind of status quo analysis. Second of all, I'm going to characterize to you what kind of benefit and what kind of, exchanges that happens in the status quo in regards towards this kind of trade. First, let's talk about why China is a good partner. Several reasons here. right now, China have a long-term mission rather than short-term aggressive investment like Belt and Road Initiative, for example. They already have like housing crisis in the status quo. There are a lot of various technological sanctions in the Western area, so they need to self-sustain themselves in the status quo, meaning that they want to invest most strategically, not having a debt trap that is happening in Africa or any other country. But second of all, China is a good partner because currently they have the ultimate share of supply chain and also shipping inside of the North and also Southeast Asia. The competition between US and China is very increased at the very moment, and US is basically kind of losing because they are making more and more subpar products. We already see how Chinese products is also very increasing in the status quo. There's a massive turn of investment that is coming from China right now. So we think that their main incentive in the status quo is to continuing this legacy. So this is very true. Why? Because there's a lot of Chinese product in Cambodia as well. Chinese product in Cambodia and also Vietnam is basically a huge hub. There's a lot of trade, there's a lot of bilateral agreement in the status quo. But second of all, I've already characterized to you Vietnam as a country is very industrialized, technological is very contingent towards China. China is also contingent to them. What I'm trying to establish to you here is that there is a mutual benefit. They will have a good economical benefit there because there are two interests here. We're not talking about like Vietnam and Cambodia only pegging towards China, but China actually needs this kind of resources. But second of all, this canal is not only pegging to economical benefit, but this is also a political power tool and whatsoever. I'm going to tell you why this is better in our side of the house. Let's go into the first part of my argument. No, thank you, I will give you later. But first thing first, why this is economically very benefiting of the canal, let's talk about how these two countries will react in regards towards the building and the continuing in this canal. We think that canal is a very strategic mission, it's a very strategic project because you basically connect and make a shortcut from the entire Persian Gulf to the Asia, North Asia, and also Southeast Asia at the end of the day. So this will emphasize China dominance. We diversify people that could have access towards China's trade. Australia right now could trade semiconductor, manufacturing, textile, and also heavy Chinese-backed products because of this canal. Because right now there is a delay of time, there's a delay and a lot of shipping costs, and it's very expensive because there is no canal and also no shortcuts in the status quo. But second of all, why am I so sure about this? Because you've already seen another parallel example. Things like Panama Canal is happening in the status quo, and you see how it connects America, South America, and also the United States as a continent. So I'm going to tell you that the economical benefit will go to China, but also it will trickle down towards other countries like Cambodia and Vietnam. How is this true? First, the making of canal is not only pegging to economical benefit, but also things like hotel, entertainment, resorts, other kinds of construction will trickle down towards this kind of untapped part of the island. So I'm trying to tell you here is that it's not only them trying to making a shortcut, but it's also trying to alleviate economy inside of their island. So the impact is under two folds. First, in regards towards global market, I think there is an easier trade route, so people could trade better. Second of all, optimize shipping costs because right now it's very expensive. But third, there's an Asia and other connectivities. Sure.
Sorry, so to clarify, your reason is that China has made historically bad decisions, but now's the time that they're going to change into a positive trajectory. Why?
You're basically very pessimistic. I've already tell you why China is already have a good interest, but I'm going to tell you why at the end of the day, regardless what China does, this is a good momentum for Cambodia and Vietnam, which basically comes to you with my second argument, right? Why this is going to be a good political benefit and also incentive towards Cambodia and also Vietnam as a country. First, I'm going to characterize to you that this is the only momentum. There's no other investor that will come towards Cambodia and Vietnam because why? Because Cambodia right now, exactly what OG said, they're facing human trafficking issue. They're facing a lot of, gambling problems and whatever, where they import workers from Indonesia to be abused in Cambodia, and this is something that happens. So, there is no alternative for Cambodia rather than China going to invest in them. You are competing with Vietnam and Thailand for tourism. You are competing with Singapore for international hub or attraction from Western countries. You are competing with Philippines for other immigrant workers. So there's basically no competitive advantage towards Cambodia other than opting for continuing for this hub. So this is the only way making our case very exclusive. I'm going to tell you why our mechanism here is foolproof for Cambodia and also Vietnam under several reasons. Our mechanism doesn't rely on any worst cases of China being, reliable partner or benevolent or not, because we think that there are a lot of existing check and balance mechanism. First, there are Asian and China partnership, trade agreement, a good incentive from huge international, or at least in this case Southeast Asian entity to supervise this kind of trade, so China will not be as exploitative. But second, government corruption is otherwise, like if they say that hey, Cambodia is very caught up in whatever in this moment, we think that this kind of trade, this kind of project actually make China make a surveillance towards Cambodia. So they actually make the ports well. They're actually functioning because if they're not functioning, they will not make the ports happen and whatsoever. They don't want to repeat the same mistake with debt trap in Africa or other Belt and Road investment. Hence, the increase of surveillance is going to happen in our side of the house. But third of all, I want to notice that the Infoslide is literally say that there are 51% of ownership of Cambodia, meaning that Cambodia has the share. It's not like we're selling all of this to China, and I really want to tell you that. And this is exactly what I've already, characterized to you, how this is very benevolent for Cambodia and Vietnam. Opposition wins.
We thank leader of opposition for the fine speech. Now to continue, Deputy Chairman here.
I'm going to explain two things in this round. First, I will deal with a lot of the economic pushes that come from opening opposition and tell you why Ern See's materials on the economic non-viability of this canal is still something that stands in this round. Secondly, I'll tell you why relying on high ports currently is probably the worst decision Cambodia can make given the current status quo. First, why is this broadly bad economic behavior? I think Ern See's material, why this needs to be done now is significantly important. The reason why this needs to be done now is this timely manner. You have a golden window of opportunity where necessarily you can pull out funding now, which means much of the cost that has gone into the construction of this canal has not been physical cost, but a lot of planning and negotiation. That means it's very minimal as to the cost that's actually happening. That means the loss to Cambodia, if at all occurs, is very minimal because they have to pay back stuff like planning costs. It's far worse of the corrective later. If you have to cancel the project halfway through when you've already begun construction and surveying of the land, the cost is a lot higher, which means on the comparative Cambodia either if it fails, Cambodia either has to pay back fully all the Chinese investors that they borrow money from, or necessarily have to take on the full cost of the finishing of this project, which given the agreed upon premise of how Cambodia looks like economically, simply cannot do in the process of their entire economic benefit. Therefore, three questions here. Number one, is this construction feasible in status quo? I want to know, there is no likelihood analysis as in opening opposition as to why this construction will even happen in a good way. But Ern See tells you multiple ways as to why construction is infeasible. Number one, this is happening during an incredibly tenuous time within Cambodian geopolitics, and I'll explain more of this later. But secondly, it's unclear as to how long the construction of this canal will take. Given the fact that you're constructing in unfamiliar territory, going through areas which you haven't gone to before, that means it's unclear as to how long this time actually legitimately takes for you to do that because you have to carve through unfamiliar geography. But third, there's an immense scale of Cambodian tax money that needs to go there, which means the strain that it has across the strain it has on the Cambodian economy across the length of the construction of this is both politically and economically problematic for the current Cambodian government, which means we are unsure whether the construction project actually significantly succeeds or succeeds in a timely manner that does not cost the Cambodian government an immense amount of money at the upfront cost in doing this. Secondly, let's take the best case of opening opposition. Even if this canal is constructed perfectly and like there are no hiccups, no delays, no sunk cost fallacy that goes into this, will this reap economic benefits? And all claims that it will because there's an increased amount of trade that therefore flows towards Cambodia. This is categorically untrue for a couple of reasons. Number one, they claim Vietnam will benefit on this. Guys, the whole reason we're building this canal is so we can bypass Vietnam to go to the ports in Thailand, which means Vietnam just does not have economic benefits. And if Vietnam's as big as a political actor, they claim they are economic actor, it's probably more ripe for Vietnamese retaliation economically at the point in which you are bypassing a very clear form of profit for them. Secondly, this is also geographically problematic because they claim now Australia is able to access China trade. So I'm not a great geography student, but as far as I know, Australia does not have to go through that area to access China. China has multiple ports that you can go through that does not require you to cut through like the Indo-China region in order for you to reach proper China trading interests. Third, it's incredibly high upkeep costs. So even if I believe that they're able to get money from this trade, which by the way has no proof as to how actually you're getting the tangible kinds of money from using this trade, the very nature of them saying that there's a high maintenance cost means that the upkeep cost of maintaining this canal in operational status could overwhelm the amount of benefits that you're actually seeing from this. Fourth, while they claim that Chinese companies won't leave, and even want to buy the best case of them claiming Chinese companies won't leave, the problem is you have no ability to actually manage these things properly or gain actual ROI. So the very impetus is, even if Chinese companies are the best actors within the round, if you are unable to give them ROI or give them better investment, because you're unable to actively prove the economic viability of this canal, that is when they start to slowly pull out, and that's when you start bleeding money. So we don't think Chinese companies are malicious, but they are economically centered and business centered. So if their investment is not making them money, that's when they start to pull out necessarily. Why is the comparative far better? And there are multiple other mechanisms. So there's a claim for opening opposition, or it's a claim from LO that there are no other alternatives for Cambodia within them. This is not true. Cambodia is still a significant part of ASEAN. That means there are multi-versions of ASEAN trade, multi-versions of ASEAN interconnectedness in terms of like automotive transports, like, okay, I'm not talking about the EV thing I went to, but like there's large like trade in terms of like automotive industries, in terms of textile industries, in manufacturing industries. Cambodia is still one of the highest rates of cheap labor. It means there are multiple areas in which Cambodia can better economically improve themselves. They need to prove why this canal is the tipping point in order for Cambodian improvement. I think there are fundamental reasons why Cambodia is still better off without them. Okay, good. This explains why it's economically bad. Now I will tell you why it is bad politically and geopolitically for Cambodia to start doing this. Why relying on iPods as an alternative is an unstrategic decision given the current context. As of 3 days ago, Cambodia and Thailand entered an open shooting war within the government border. What is the context between these two countries? 4 things. First, the border dispute is an active one in which people are shooting at each other and their active lives being lost. So this isn't just a border disagreement, this is an active conflict in which people have already died. Both civilians and soldiers have sacrificed their lives for these conflicts. Secondly, this is a second time flashpoint. It means this isn't going away very quickly. This happened 6 months ago when Thailand and Cambodian troops started shooting each other. This happened again a couple of days ago. This is not going away anytime soon because it's a repeated historical problem between the borders of these two countries. Third, the narrative surrounding this conflict is currently incredibly bad. And this preempts any opposition argument that says, but this conflict will end by the time we open the canal. I want you to check the current narratives that are surrounding this conflict. Number one, Thailand has rejected multiple sues for peace for Cambodia. So Cambodia wants peace, but Thailand does not want it because of several reasons. But secondly, the narratives internally in the Thai government has stated that they want to fundamentally remove Cambodia's ability from being posed a threat to Thailand, which means dismantling their military operation. That does not sound like a small border conflict. That sounds like a systematic dismantling of Cambodia's ability to defend themselves, which is unstrategic because of the growth of nationalism between these two countries. Fourth, there is a vast asymmetrical military power between these two countries, swings directly into the Thai advantage, which means even if Cambodia will continue construction of this canal, Thai military is immensely strong. So on all fronts they lose. If Thailand has to be involved in the construction of this canal, this is far worse for the Cambodian conflict as a whole. Before I go on to what this means for the round, sure.
Your case proves that there's no other international incentive or other actors that wants to go into Cambodia. This is the only momentum that China actually cares about Cambodia. Why do you want to?
Okay, if we lose all Chinese companies in this investment, that's fine. Cambodia has other alternatives to grow economically. I don't know why we needed Chinese companies or Cambodia will die. Let's talk about the Thai round again, because I like this case. So what does this significantly mean for the round? Two things. Number one, the process of building this canal becomes incredibly difficult because in building this canal, you have to deal with Thai territory because Thai territory also cuts through the Mekong River. What does this mean? At best, you get abject non-cooperation from a state that's actively shooting at you. At worst, this makes the active disruption of the canal construction and becomes a new conflict zone in which high flashpoints can happen and more loss of life, which is not only bad economically, but bad for the people working there and means more lives get lost when you continue construction in this comparative. But secondly, it removes focus away from core issues. When you are at war with another country, it is quite bad to have amounts of your resources tied up in an immovable project that you're unable to pull out because you have international commitments. But number two, it's also politically unstrategic. You have a vast majority of people saying that the government doesn't care about the people dying on the border, but cares more about the construction of canals, which is incredibly politically unstrategic for the Cambodian government. Why is the comparative better? We rely on Vietnamese ports and we move focus towards resolving an active conflict. These are more economically strategic decisions for Cambodia, but also more timely decisions given the current context at address.
Thank you then for the fine speech. Now to continue dialogue. Take care.
Unless OG has unless OG has definitely proved that this will immediately fails, that means their win is also speculative as much as their case on the failure is also speculative. But moreover than that, Viola has already characterized to you the established arguments on why there are likelihoods of this success of them. Look, how does the canal work in the first place? Like, the reason why we have gone through feasibility studies, consultations that have been made proves that this canal is optimal is due to the fact that this canal cuts lots of water trade routes, water shipping routes. This means we are connecting lots of Southeast Asian region that is on the left. Rather than they have to go around and go to Vietnam, for example, they can directly bypass, for example. That means the benefit will directly traded, directly imminent to nations like Singapore, Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesia. I'm sorry, I'm not a geography student either. I will F up this round. But it also benefits the countries on the left on the map. This means European nations and other nations on the American that have to cut off and they have to go to Indonesia, stop at Vietnam, to go to China, for examples. Is there other trade routes that are more optimal, like Australia perhaps, that can stop in Vietnam? Yes, but the reason exactly why Cambodia is not sustaining their ports, but Vietnam suffers massive backlog due to the fact that there are lots of shipments that are delayed by months that creates economical cost, by the way, is due to the fact that are some trade routes that are currently established that are suboptimal. What does this story told you? This story told you three things. Number one, the Vietnam reduced backlog of their ports creates efficient trade route. It after the burden load means various nations can enjoy faster shipping, means lower economic costs due to the fact that they do not have to spend so much time on the shipping days, for examples. But more than that, the Cambodian canal is a more efficient route for currently existing supply routes, means an established market in the first place. It's not like we have to build a product and market it as if like this is a new novel thing. People already optimize it to the fact that there are investors that are willing to pay 49% of 1.6, which is like around $800 million. I'm also bad at math. But more than that, the demand is a pre-existing one. The Chinese goods, the transport to Asian market, for examples, on how it's not only end goods, final goods that you are selling to customers. You are also shipping materials, rare earth minerals from eastern part and western left part of Indonesia that have to be traded, for example, rather than going through Vietnam, for example. But this establishes to you that if they rely 70% of their case on the success of the projects, we assure you the success of the projects. But more than that, we are going to tell you how the project looks like, because they are trying to make you believe that we are dumping $1.6 billion at one day. Boom! All taxpayers' money go poof, everyone goes poor. This is unfactually true.
Point.
After this, yeah?
But the money hasn't been.
Go for it.
But the money hasn't been spent. Like the point being that like the canal is like in the most initial points of construction, which means that like none of the sunk costs you talk about exists.
That is the good point, right? But that's exactly where my point goes. This is how government fundraises and why even the project in itself does not fall into sunk cost policy, but instead create a multiplier effect. How do government raise funds? Government raise funds not through taking everyone's gold, melting it and selling it. They raise funds through bonds, loans, printing money through fiscal and monetary policies. Investors' money through profit sharing revenue. But more than that, it's also distributed costs throughout the project's 5 to 10 years life cycle. So it's not a huge sum of money now. But why is this important? This, regardless of the successful later on, we have established you it's going to be successful. What we are not established and we definitely cannot yet is how successful it will be, right? But the process in itself create jobs, economic multiplier effects when you hire people to construct, when you hire people to provide the supplies for the constructors, when you hire people to mine the necessary extraction minerals, to create those. These people pay tax. These people purchases products. These people creates another businesses. It creates multiplier effects that runs the economy better than ever. But more than that, even if later, look, at this point, at December of 2025, we believe it's no longer about whether or not the canal is a success or not. The canal is feasible, the canal is success. Feasibility studies through investment projects and so on and so forth has been made. Before 6, go ahead.
Yes, you're describing the benefits of any government infrastructure project. Why is the tipping point the creation of this canal that does not circumvent that much?
Yeah, let me establish that before framing that out. But more than that, the successful project means economic growth for Cambodia. But more than that, even if in the process there is some issues in the process, for example, the issues is not as massive as the canal turns out is bad, but how do we improve it? A constant evaluation that will be done throughout the projects. There is no massive structural issues as if the canal is not a good project. But more than that, the 10 years business and construction growth is already generating enough economic growth for them to, say, for example, transfer to other similar or transferable industries like shipping, like storage, like parts, like extraction, and so on and so forth. But exactly why it has to be this canal, first of all, if they want to debate other infrastructure, let's have another round. We have explicitly told you why it has to be specifically this, because otherwise the other options are less competitive for Cambodia. We are already losing to Vietnam about semiconductors, manufacturing, for example. We are losing to Singapore for finance, for example. This is our advantage right now. But more than that, generating, if they are concerned about political turmoil, wars and dispute and so on and so forth, our answer is simple. The starting of constructions create a bargaining chip that to push for truce or armistice, because historically political leaders can compromise through economic benefits. Pause.
Okay, we thank Diallo for the nice speech. Now to start the closing half, Member Garfield here.
Front half is focused on the small fish in the debate, but I think they've missed one key actor, which is China. The extension is simple, is that we have heightened military conflict in the South China Sea, and this inflames tensions, which makes things far worse for everyone in the world as a whole. So why does this happen? First thing to clarify is that China is pretty much besties with Cambodia. They like hang out, they go on dates together, really good friends, and they're kind of the way that China has the most influence exercised on ASEAN as a whole. So China, as the Infoslide says, is going to be running the operations of the Funan Techo Canal, as well as funding providing a lot of the funding for it and the controlling 49% of it in the end, which gives them massive amounts of influence. Why is this true? Two reasons. The first is that there's a funding reliance, so they spent 49% of the money to build the whole thing to begin with. That means that now the Cambodian government owes China in the future for the fact that they've helped with this favor. So just in terms of how political horse trading works, they need to follow along with Chinese instructions in the future. And this is harmful because also, as the Infoslide points out, this canal is likely to have low viability and incredibly high maintenance costs, which means it's unlikely for it to be able to pay for itself, or if you want to have upgrades and whatnot, which means that you're probably going to have a large replacement of things like Chinese workers with vocational training who have the technical skills to actually address and operate this thing to begin with, which means they have control to shut it down at any point. Secondly, the leaders themselves, so HS and HM, the leaders of Cambodia, they rely massively on China to support their regime in terms of other campaign financing and legitimacy and optics as a whole. So the provision of military gear in Cambodia primarily comes from past Soviet states or from China as a whole. So there's a deep reliance on satisfying what China actually wants. Therefore, they're highly likely to agree with China in almost all cases of operations and uses of this canal in order to avoid conflict and to get along with them. What are the impacts of this then? The first is, I think, that they're likely to be influenced massively, which allows China to expand their influence in the South China Sea And the reason why they want to do this is because they want to claim it for strategic reasons, such as being able to export more of their goods, to have military control over it, and for things like operations in Taiwan. Many, many reasons. I think OO themselves are conceding for this. So they can do things like build more oil rigs and islands now, because you can send more ships out and do more construction inside of the South China Sea to claim more landing legitimacy. But secondly, they can also send more ships to do surveillance to ensure other ships from other countries cannot do things such as fish or stop illegal fishing and extraction from occurring, or Chinese shipping of goods illegally to bypass things like sanctions or whatnot. Those are incredibly important for China's economy, even if they're developing domestically and they need to sell to outwardly. So this allowing them to get more control of the South China Sea is massively important. So that also means that China gets more legitimacy as well. The way that happens is that now they can claim that the ships they're placing there are done for the purposes of shipping or for building this canal, even if it isn't actually for those purposes. But they can just say, you know, we're defending the canal which we're helping to operate. That's why we have a Chinese ship here. The fact that we're watching you, that's just like a side effect or whatever. But secondly, and more importantly, you just allow a new geographical physical entry point to access areas which you couldn't previously access. So you can deploy ships faster and respond quicker to do things such as deter, like, I don't know, like other countries, but also you can enter previously unenterable places like the Gulf of Thailand and have far more influence then because of that. How do you weigh this? I think our claim is far more long-term. When China expands their control of the South China Sea, they take away a lot of sovereignty of other states to self-govern. So you have more extractive projects, more debt trapping, more political influence that takes away the voices of people to choose for themselves what's best for themselves because they know what's best for themselves instead. But also I want to weigh this in economics, and I think we can outweigh everything you hear from HAP in 4 ways. One, you have less Western investment because of your involvement with China. So if it's viewed as investment in China, they don't want to do it. But also in the case where you sanction China, there's now more tie-up of other South Asian states along the process of this deal who also get harmed. For example, if Cambodia is a part of the process of exporting Chinese goods and Chinese goods get sanctioned, Cambodia no longer makes money from this canal for ships passing through. Secondarily, you also have to spend more on military spending. As South China Sea countries are now more likely to have to spend more on the deterrence and to like buy new ships and pay soldiers. That trades off with increased investment as well. The comparative, I think, is on our side of the house, you get value added along the way when you process things. And this flips the OO case, because they're saying we can be more efficient if we just one-shot it to our destination. If that was the case, Singapore wouldn't exist because you wouldn't have the port, people wouldn't make money here, and so there's like, I think it's good that we add value along the way instead. That flips the point there. Thirdly, I think that even if you get money, I think it's likely consolidated at the top. They never prove it trickles down. Cambodia is highly authoritarian. That state gets far worse when they're enriched by China deeper on this side of the house. It's probably used to oppress dissent instead, so I'm not sure if their benefit manifests, even if the GDP of Cambodia exists. Finally, if you allow China to operate more, they're likely to flood the market with cheap goods. So what China does is just export a crap ton. They have the greatest sort of trade surplus in history so far, and they just outcompete a lot of other countries and companies, and also replace the jobs of poor locals in those countries. So on net, these countries are far worse, and the world is far worse if China has increased influence. The second impact is reduced regional collaboration in Southeast Asia. The ASEAN way essentially is one of informal diplomacy. To say that people ought to have the norms and all countries should agree to protect sovereignty and to just get along in those ways. But this harms us in 2 ways. One, it breaks the trust, because it breaks the trust of the informal diplomacy to say that Cambodia no longer trusts Vietnam and instead is going to go and build their own path instead, disrupting the water flows of Vietnam incredibly directly. So that signals a massive lack of trust in the system and in ASEAN as a whole. But secondly, allowing the entry of China also is a huge fuck you to sovereignty as a whole, which we think is incredibly harmful and also would be something that ASEAN reacts very strongly. This is likely a tipping point on the already existing ethnic tensions and already issues inside, such as the Thailand-Cambodia thing that like OG touches on for like a minute or two, but I think that this becomes far, far worse then. What are the impacts? One, I think you have a decrease in free trade. And this is incredibly important because tariffs probably outweigh the marginal decrease in export costs that you hear from an opposition bench instead. And secondly, I think you have a decrease in peace brokering as well. It's important we maintain peaceful relationships, and that's incredibly important. One, because we save lives, but two, on the economic things too. So how does this weigh economically, right? Firstly, I think peace and collaboration is important for business certainty to actually want to invest inside these areas. Do things like purchase agreements and buy lots of your goods, having the trust that the factory will still be there in the year to produce and sell those goods back to you specifically. But also, I think that on net, the destabilization of Southeast Asia is far more harmful than good. What is the counterfactual then? I think ASEAN is doing well on either side, but there's a push from opposition that Cambodia is failing. Here's a fact: the GDP of Cambodia has increased on average 7% for the last 2 or 3 decades every single year. So their growth is actually incredibly good, and this comes from many of the examples that OG points out, things like the garment industry, but also agricultural goods, tourism, construction, natural resources like timber and gold, the things that they can all export anyways on either side of the house. The necessity for this is very unclear. Why does this case beat opening government? Because the OG talks about the Thai-Cambodian war. One, I think this is short-termist or uncertain as to how long or problematic this will be. Our claim is far more long-term on the destabilization of the South China Sea, of ASEAN as a whole, and of the increased Chinese influence as a whole, and why that's incredibly harmful. The second extension I want to run very briefly, just because it's free, is that this harms Vietnam because of water disruption. So the Infoslide explains that you're going to distort the water flow to Vietnam. And this is important because the Mekong River flows from like north to south and all the way down Vietnam. And so there's lots of farmers and agriculture which is built off of this, because this is the main way that Vietnam is able to get clean, like non-salty water, even though they're like, have some ocean beside them and stuff like this. This is important because farmers and agriculture is like $1 billion industry, but these people rely on this water for watering their plants as well as irrigation. And so I think what occurs is more things like floods or like bad crop seasons, which one, drives food prices up massively, but two, leads to the starvation of subsistence farmers in rural Vietnam as well. We're incredibly proud to propose.
Okay, we thank Member Guth for the fine speech. Now, Member of Opposition, have him.
CEO's entry in this debate is going to be quite simple. We're just going to prove the benefits to the economy, mostly on stability, that we don't think our opening broadly is able to prove by the end of this debate. But before that, I just want to deal autonomously with some of the things that CG talks about. CG, in the non-economic material, talks about how this is going to show that Cambodia doesn't trust ASEAN because China, as a big villain, plays highly in this debate. I'm not sure why this is specifically the tipping point as to why Cambodia is suddenly going to be blacklisted from ASEAN, given ASEAN's current largest trading partner, and this is not a secret, is China. China's involvement in ASEAN presently is already bigger than every other trader currently, so I'm not sure why this specifically is going to be the tipping point as to why they'll be like, fuck Cambodia and throw them one side. The problem here is that in these cases, we think that the comparative isn't going to be specific antagonization from other countries like Vietnam, because if you are explicitly backed by a big superpower like China, then the extent of negotiating power over certain instances of trade that Cambodia currently does not have goes up and outside the house, as I will continue to touch on. My argument will be broadly on the stability of the Cambodian economy. The first thing I want to point out is that there's a large amount of risk in different directions currently in Cambodia's pursuit of exports or trade. The first is risk broadly on a Vietnamese aspect, because there are pressures currently from Vietnam or the capacity for Vietnam to place premiums on trade currently. And the reason why is because Vietnam knows that presently Cambodia relies basically like 70% or more of its existing export industry through deals explicitly signed with Vietnam. Another thing I want to note here before I move on is that I'm very unclear as to why this OG thinks that suddenly all these things will suddenly disappear, ignoring even the implementation lag that currently exists, because free trade deals don't just suddenly disappear with a snap of a finger. The comparative is not just that you have disappearing of these trade, because Vietnam still wants military review. Yes?
No, so it's the scale, right? Because currently, if you want to engage militarily, you can only engage in the fringes. But right now, you have literal direct access into the internal geography of Thailand, which allows you to intervene more harder as a result, increasing the tensions.
But there's still vast control. They can still put their naval vessels or their planes there if they want to, because they hold vast control over your nation's economy. I'm not sure what the comparative is going to be. Okay, why is it that this is broadly bad? Because it introduces vast amount of risk, because Vietnam holds bears a stranglehold over Cambodia's present export industry. The second aspect of risk is the Chinese risk, and I think OO doesn't actually deal with it, and explicitly, neither will I. We agree that Chinese risk presently exists. The comparative is that there's no present check or balance in the current existence. So there is risk coming from both sides. Why is it that this risk balances out? Because Vietnam and China broadly don't like one another. If they push you away, they push you to the other side. And this is broadly why we think that trade deals are going to broadly improve, because the negotiating power specifically in the hands of Cambodia as a country that's stuck in the middle between these two countries just broadly increases. So why is it that this also improves the situation we think with with Thailand. The first thing to know is that we just think that engagement with Thailand is much better in these grounds. It's very strange that OG just assumes that we are going to, as Cambodia, just trot into Thailand and start destroying their land. I'm not sure why this is the case. The present planning and the deals that are currently being made are probably just going to be active negotiations with Thailand to be able to do these kinds of things. Why is it that Thailand is going to accept these deals? Broadly because we think that these are very big concessions in the formation of the identity for Cambodia. Because we accept that Thailand wants to, in this case, crumple the identity of Cambodia, both in the military sense and both in the existential sense, and being able to have some degree of stake in its literal pursuit of economic independence is a very big deal that it's going to broadly pursue. The second is because if it doesn't do this, it risks angering China, because China has a very big stake in this, and Thailand probably does not want to antagonize such a big actor. What is the impact of all of this in this debate? We think that the capacity to increase the scale of their exports to a vast level allows for the improvement of the Cambodian economy. The comparative, we admit, might be upskilling, but that's just not particularly effective. Firstly, because all the loans by which you pursue this are still coming from China. Your development of other industries still come from China, and showing that you are unable to meet the goals that you set out with such a large present loan is just not going to send good signals to them, because they're very scared whether or not they continue to be able to do this. The second is that these industries don't see much legway for you to be able to improve the quality of your economy, because it's very hard to upscale the entirety of the economy if they are stuck doing these blue-collar work, as opposed to focusing more on higher-scale export industries. The last thing I want to talk about is specifically how this plays into the dynamics of the existing Hun government, because I don't think that's broadly been touched on in this debate. And I think the important thing to point out is that this isn't just, as the government bench asserts, a general soft kind of planning. That's not what the Hun government has done. Maybe that is a plan sitting on Hun Sen's table, but it's a lot more than that. It's the fact that they based the entirety of their legitimacy on this kind of thing. The fact that for the recent years and the recent months, the basis upon which they have demanded economic upliftment to be pursued is specifically through this. What does it look like? It means that they have actively campaigned on this. It means that they have already been prepping deals for the excavation that currently occurs. Not only is there an opportunity cost, the more important impact of this is that this is the basis upon which they have attempted to scale up, and they've made many promises that lead to the sunk cost. So even if we accept OG's claim that there is presently a possible cost if we just abandon, or if we continue the project, though I have placed some doubt on that, the comparative is that the Hun government is unable to meet the promises that is currently been putting into place. Why is it that the comparative to this is quite bad? Firstly, because you delegitimize actively the Hun government. And I think the Hun government is a very good government presently for Cambodia. They assert that it's just authoritarian, but that's authoritarian with a very big asterisk. Because what is the comparative? Hun Sen's government formed directly out of fighting against the Khmer rule. He's more than his political opponents caring about ethnic minorities. The comparative in people like Kem from the CNRP is that you fucking hate ethnic minorities and you really don't care about them in your pursuit of a national identity. They don't include them, for instance, into your economy. The comparative, even if you accept that authoritarians are sometimes bad for developing states birthing or pursuing upliftment, in these particular cases, this is the best that Cambodia is ever going to be able to get. Why is all of this important? The first thing to know is that even if you accept the OG claim at their highest, the comparative outcomes are much better for Cambodia, because you decrease the extent of which they are vulnerable to present risks to their economy by diversifying the existing capacity for trade and exports through the variety of different routes. The comparative on their side, and why they think that Vietnam or China will both be very antagonistic, is because there's no counterbalance on their side of the house, where there is one on our side of the house. The second reason, independent of this, is that it allows for a greater strengthening of the promises of the present government that we broadly recognize to be the best that Cambodia is able to access at this point in time. For these reasons, very important votes.
Okay, thanks, member. Let's go, Rafa.
I want to first take on the challenge of closing opposition in terms of the challenge in margins and scale. There's two things that obviously change. The first is that currently they are limited by, like conflicts are limited by the fact they can only engage on the side and the coast. This means you cannot enter specifically from the places regionally. This is important because obviously the scale and depth specifically in which we engage China as an enemy obviously also is contingent on how deeply China can intervene with you. The second is obviously the scale of access, i.e. how many ships and Chinese ships can access you right now. Obviously not a lot, because even if it's true they can send quite a bit, there's obviously a large increase in glut, especially when opening opposition already concedes to the fact that like you want a lot of Chinese ships to come in order to increase your trade. This means on the counterfactual, China is a distant threat on our side of the house. They are still a threat, but they're not a threat enough specifically to disrupt specifically regional and local interactions, but they already are to an extent. The problem is that this increases significantly in the large margin. The second thing I want to talk about is that the access to like the negotiating power in closing opposition comes from the fact that Cambodia increases because China homogeneity is good. I'll explain later why this is bad. It's not if China say I don't friend you anymore and stops trade because you don't friend them anymore because you stop the development of this. This response loses to the response that trade and already existing trade deals that exist and they're beneficial, so they won't stop them because if you stop them, that makes it bad for China themselves. Lastly, the opposition will kill minorities, but you don't prove A, why the opposition in Cambodia right now is likely to overthrow them at a point that they do not actually fulfill this. But number two, like they are already killing minorities. Like the problem here seems to be like the existing like government also kills minorities. There's no scale of change there. I think closing opposition is cleaning out of this round. Opening government then. Opening government, I'm surprised no one talks about South China Sea conflict, especially Chinese interference. And there's a few things I want to establish and position Alex's material on. The first is that Southeast Asia and China have an extremely fraught relationship because China interferes regionally already in the status quo. I.e. the military exercises on the coast of the Philippines, for example, where they spray the hell out of like Filipino fishermen, where they put things like, for example, and they establish oil rigs in places they're not supposed to establish, means for a fact that A, there's an increase in military like intervention specifically from China within the Southeast Asian region. This becomes a huge amount of military threat specifically. But the second thing as well is that they have also now established and asserted dominance, especially within the South China Sea along those coasts. This also means that the ability for them to be able to like they're already infringing on like the Southeast Asian like sovereignty, and we are all trying and you're all trying to like collectively here say that China's a bad actor, but we cannot. Even as of now, but it wasn't later. But it wasn't later as a result of this policy. Lastly, in terms of dumping, competition and the really terrible policies that China has done and opening opposition concedes, China has historically put countries in debt trap. China obviously, when they built infrastructure, historically started infrastructure with their local individuals because they have a glut of individuals who are currently unemployed. This means that all the Sri Lankan ports currently they are profitable for China, but not for the Sri Lankan people, yeah? Like the Sri Lankan people currently still unemployed, yeah? They still have no job, yeah? So even if the port is there, the local economy obviously doesn't benefit, but also many people are very scared of this. Without this, versus opening government, I'm not sure why China's interference is bad, because like they don't actually tell you what the incentives of China are, but it also, I think it's a lot more compelling specifically, because opening government says that there is experts. These experts are hired by China, these experts are hired by individuals who have a vested interest towards China, they have the shareholder press to do so. This also means your experts fail as a result. The opening government doesn't hedge against it. The second thing that we prove obviously to position this is the heightening of these tensions. This increases the Chinese dominance, and that's a bad thing. The first is again they do more of the bad stuff. They're better able to station ships to screw with the countries they don't like in the South China Sea. They're able to increase military spots specifically in the South China Sea port, in the South China Sea locales. But more importantly, they're able to establish more interference because they screw with communications as a result. They increase they disrupt ship communications. They disrupt comms specifically between countries. If this is true, the leaders of Cambodia will be a slap for them because this allows for them to be beholden because of the 49% and for all the reasons that closing opposition and opening opposition talks about. This increases the tensions between Thailand and Cambodia, but as ASEAN as a whole, this increases the potential of ASEAN being extremely suspicious and scared of each other. The whole point of the ASEAN way specifically is that you ought not to infringe on my authority, but also that big power politics should never play a role within the region, that we should stand together and fight united against big power politics, and we ought not to bow to them. This is problematic because this obviously places a wrench in your plans, i.e. that the ability for you to have free trade agreements obviously is contingent on you not contingent on you trusting the other bugger not to have Chinese interference. Is you trusting the other fella to not screw with your trade? This flies all out the window at a point in which the canal interconnects that more. But number two, there's obvious environmental harms. Building canals historically is heavily disruptive. Stopping you now, stopping now is okay because again you haven't done all the big work to actually build the canal halfway there, right? But the disruption of the flow of water, for example, prevents you from being able to drink water and prevents you from being able to build crops. And surprise, Cambodia and Thailand, are agricultural bases. This also means that you have nothing to export even if you have the ports, yeah? Because what you were exporting was the grain, but the grain no more because you have no water to bloody water the grain, right? So if that's true, then how, right? So they've also not only just disrupted your economy internally, you've disrupted your trade flow elsewhere. Great, now two economies are ruined. The harm is higher on scale, because their harm is Thailand and Cambodia. Now it's Thailand, Cambodia, and the rest of ASEAN. This one very easy. But two, obviously on impact, because they're The people pew each other, correct, but they pew each other on either side of the house. The pew happens more regionally, but also the death of crops obviously affects the rest of the world because you don't export crops and people don't have food. Before I move on, yes, proceed.
I'm not sure about the expansion of the Chinese Navy, given they currently have free access to SOS, and stuff like the littoral mission vessels cannot A, physically enter canals, and B, by maritime routes.
So this changes at the point that Cambodia doesn't have to uphold any part of their trade, of their military use, yeah? So like all the talk in the world specifically of not being able to enter flies out the window at the point the canal is established, because what are you going to do to the canal, right? But also the canal is not owned by Cambodia and China. This also means that like it's better able to like access those things. So the bypassing of all the things we talk about are a lot easier as a result. So even if they do exist, the bypassing scale impact. Not just Cambodia, therefore, let's just situate the impacts. The first is the deadlocks. Like this deadlock trade developments, there's a very real problem. This increase in military action, we think this is bad. But two, lesser investor confidence. So opening government's claim and closing government's claim, but opening off and closing off extension is but investor confidence. Hello, hi. So I'm not sure if you want to build in a region specifically where war can break out at any time, but also when like your entire like agricultural industry gets disrupted. Not sure what you want to build there. But lastly, this harms agriculture again. Done enough. Opening opposition. The contribution is that the trade to China is important. So inexclusive, duh. But number two, the trade-off is very simple. The trade is suboptimal. Can lah. So there's lesser trade. Cool. If ASEAN don't like each other, the contingent effect obviously very high. This like investor confidence comes prior towards you being able to have more trade, because like if investors don't and establish things there, because investors don't like the fact that like ASEAN is currently being extremely fragmented, they just won't enter. This also necessarily means that all the investment stuff they talk about gets outweighed by priority. Two, on scale, it's not like they will disappear, but on our side there's a real chance of capital flight. Three, on long-term harms, once the canal built there, cannot unbuild the canal, yeah? This means that all the agricultural harms are not temporary, yeah, forever, yeah? This means people cannot drink water forever, yeah? That's a bad thing, because, you drink water to survive. For all these reasons, closing government.
Thanks, David, for the science stage. Now to end off the debate up with Pekya.
The way our side is able to really state it exclusively is just uncertainty, bringing you more visceral and more proximate impacts towards Cambodia itself, as well as showing you why all the other harms are necessarily not factual. Let's first deal with CG's intrusion, or China will exert their influence, and that's necessarily bad. This is the biggest harm is China has more influence over the South China Sea as well as ASEAN as a whole. Two things to posit here. Firstly, I am not sure why this is necessarily the worst thing, because I think China really has a lot of control over the South China Sea, which necessarily means that there's not much delta to their case, so it already exists. But second, I also want to note that Donovan's POI posits to you, it is physically impossible for them to assert more dominance over the canal. You know why? Because the canal is quite narrow, and the amount of space that you need to bring in your big military ships is like huge. The reason why that space doesn't exist is because your cargo tankers already take up a lot of space. So I'm unsure as to why, like, even on their side, you're able to assert more dominance. Even your small boat, your small military boats, right, they are needed to assert significant amounts of influence, are also not going to be able to pass through. So I'm a bit weirded out by the extension. But here's what we flip it. Even if you assume that their case is true, we flip and say China's allyship is actually great. You know why? Because when you get an allyship with China, you're actually protected by China's power. That necessarily means, and this is important in the context of this debate, because OG sets up this problem that within the Thai-Cambodia conflict, like Thailand wanted to destroy Cambodia, they wanted to delegitimize Cambodia, they wanted to destructuralize it. But I think that necessarily will flip onto them. Because when you have China's protection, now China will be like, oh, we have control over the canal, since we are business partners, let's help you with the conflict. Because if you are destabilized by Thailand, then you're not going to be our business partner as well. So I think this is necessarily good. No, thank you. And I think that this is significant as well. Because no, Thailand doesn't want to fight China. You know why? Because China is huge. China big military power, Thailand very small ASEAN nation. Like, it's going to be like, oh no, China don't want to fight them. I think that necessarily necessarily means to say that Cambodia is much more stable on our side. This is important because one, you get more peace insofar as you get more protection. Insofar as you get more, like there's a higher likelihood on our side to broker peace with China's bargaining power. But this weighs out OG's claim of increased border conflict, right? On our side at least, and I want to note the comparative scores because ASEAN's non-interference can't do shit in this debate, which means to say that the comparative is just the conflict continues to escalate, Cambodia continues to suffer at the hands of Thailand, it's probably going to be worse. No thank you. The second thing I then want to talk about is on the economic benefits of this debate and why Donald Trump's benefits are exclusively beneficial. There are three things he posits to you. Firstly, on our side, when you at least like start excavation of this canal and you finish it, you get more trade routes. So Gulf posits to you that you're going to completely ignore Vietnam. I'm unclear as to why that's the case. I'm not sure as to why you can't just patronize both trade routes. Maybe you patronize Vietnam less, but you get more trade routes on net. This is necessarily beneficial because you have more supply chains, you also have more business partners. I think this just wastes out the entirety of how they deposit you, right? I don't think it's just entirely ignoring Vietnam, that's just like strategic. But second and more importantly, you're more immune to supply shocks. This is important because it is increasingly globalized world where everything is so unstable, everything is so unpredictable. You want to prepare yourself for the worst possible economic destabilizers. That necessarily means supply shocks. The status quo looks like Cambodia, and this is the comparative as well, Cambodia only being reliant on Vietnam, which necessarily means two things that Donovan tells you. Firstly, Vietnam has a high capacity to increase premiums on Cambodia, destabilizing Cambodia's economy at the expense of its own economy as well. I think that this is necessarily bad because it means that Cambodia is now beholden to Vietnam only. On their side, on our side, maybe we're beholden to China. They posit it's bad. It's not, because you still get more economic benefits and you still get more economic privilege from China. This will be posited into you as well. There actually is going to be some competition between China and Vietnam. And increased competition is great because now it incentivizes China to be better business partners. It also incentivizes Vietnam to be better business partners towards Cambodia. So you get more economic benefits on that. This looks like engaging with local traders, for instance, giving Cambodia better prices so that everyone can benefit economically. I think increased competition within the region is great. It's significant because this is more certain at the point in which you finish the completion of this canal. The fact that you guarantee that China has some that this is likely to happen. No thank you. The comparative, and this is and the comparative that Donovan sets up for you is that if you don't patronize China, you're likely just going to antagonize it anyways. Why is this the case? Because you've come so far, you've already said, okay, you want to as you construct this canal, before you start excavation, you're not, no, China bad. You know how pissed off China is going to be and how much it's going to antagonize them? I think it's low, and it's going to be even worse because China now has more of an incentive to do things like sanction you on unjust reasons, even though it's unjust because they simply just can't because you're China, right? That's why we think that economic benefits on our side are just firstly more certain, but second and more importantly, more important because it's more proximal to the people on the ground and it actually benefits Cambodia as a whole. Before I move on to the third thing,
so you instate peace in Cambodia by destabilizing the entirety of the ASEAN region and putting the entirety of the ASEAN region's water supply at risk.
So not necessarily true because your extent of destabilization is hinged upon the fact that China can now exert even more influence on the South China Sea. But down the bench, we already proved to you that that isn't really a very big delta because it's not very different from what the status quo looks like. I'm unclear to the change of the delta. But the last thing I want to talk about is political stability. This necessarily concerns even more the Thai-Cambodia conflict, right? Why is this important about political stability? Don already tells you that the Hun government and its political legitimacy is hinged upon a lot of it's hinged upon the building of this canal in the first place. And so you need to construct this canal for the Hun government to continue being stable, to continue being in power. The comparative is worse because Waiter posits to you that actually Cambodia already kills minorities, but this is mitigatory at best. It doesn't respond to us because on our side, the comparative is that you get a worse government who's going to kill even more minorities. At the point in which you stop the construction of this canal, you're going to destabilize the legitimacy that they put onto the government. You're going to have voters being disillusioned because they thought that they were going to get all these economic benefits, but now they're going to vote against the Hun regime, and it gives way to more things like coups. It gives way to more likelihood of things like overthrowing the Hun government, and this necessarily means that more minorities are likely going to be oppressed. We think this is bad for a few reasons. Firstly, economically, it means that business partners are going to turn away from you at the point in which you have an unstable government. But two and more importantly, more people die on their side. So necessarily, I think that we just way over them in terms of stability. Also, the fact that we are able to increase Cambodia's GDP consistently necessarily means that we're also able to get more economic benefits on our side. How are we able to
weigh out OG. I think we take out the bulk of OG's claims at the point in which we introduce you the most important weighing metric, that is more certain economic benefits. Because they tell you that all the economic benefits are speculative, that it's irreversible, and it's going to be a huge economic strain. I want to note, one, China is already funding 50% of this canal. Insofar as this is the case, I don't think that there's like necessarily that huge of an economic strain. But two and more importantly, we've already proven the livelihood. We differentiate from OO at the point in which we give you more certain economic benefits, because all they say is you emphasize China's dominance by diversifying. They don't give you the max, we do. For all these reasons, zero.